You're trying to build something new, a business, maybe a career change, a new skill, but real life isn't exactly cooperating.
Right. Life keeps happening. It demands that maintain the floor, pay the bills, handle family stuff. You're basically trying to handle way too many things at once.
Exactly. And so for this deep dive, we're really going to unpack what it means to manage that enormous load.
Yeah, and I think the first thing we have to do is just ditch the fantasy of balance. It's a nice word, but it's not real.
It's not. Balance suggests this kind of perfect, calm state.
Exactly. But growth, real growth, is messy. It's dynamic. So our whole mission here is to move past that impossible ideal and instead find the practical strategies, the actual blueprints.
And we found them by looking at 6 really successful individuals, but not their success stories. We looked at their early, messy lives when they didn't wait for things to get easy. They just navigated this season of overlap.
That's the key word, overlap.
So we took a whole stack of sources, memoirs, articles, histories, and we pulled out the tactics, the survival strategies from when they were, basically running on fumes.
And we have to start with the classic example of this, the ultimate double life, Phil Knight.
Mr. Nike.
Well, before Nike. The setting is Portland, Oregon, mid-1960s, and on paper, Phil Knight is the definition of sensible.
Right, he's a young accountant.
A young accountant, trained, stable.
Yeah.
Later, he's teaching accounting at Portland State. He is, for all intents and purposes, the guy with a predictable, safe future. That's his track A. You could call it his structural floor.
And that floor was so important because what he was building on track B was, it was the opposite of that. It was completely fragile.
Utterly uncertain. Track B was his second shift. And you really have to picture the radical identity shift that happens. The sources all describe him driving around the Pacific Northwest.
It's track meets, right?
To all these regional track meets in his car, and he'd pull up, open the trunk, and just start selling these Japanese running shoes.
The company was Blue Ribbon Sports then, the ancestor of Nike. And his storefront was, it was literally the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant.
The trunk and the passenger seat.
Mm-hmm.
And that image, it just perfectly captures the psychological split he had to live with.
Oh, absolutely. Because during the week, he's got this persona, right? The credible, stable teacher, the numbers guy.
Systems, logic, predictability.
And then on nights and weekends, he's thrown into total chaos. He's got cash crunches, inventories delayed, he's worried about international shipping, and probably this constant nagging fear that this whole business is just an expensive hobby that's going nowhere.
He was time-boxing two completely different realities. Think about the cognitive load of that switch. You're explaining fiscal conservatism to college students on a Monday morning.
And then Monday night, you're frantically counting cash from the weekend to see if you can even afford the next shipment from Japan.
That's it. That contradiction, that is the essence of what we're calling parallel track growth. You have to protect your stability, your track, while you aggressively but carefully nurture your options on track B.
And he didn't just maintain that floor. He used it. It was strategic. He knew track B was way too delicate to stand on its own.
Of course.
His accounting job, the teaching gig, that was the salary. The health insurance, it was the mental safety net that let him take these huge risks with the shoe company without, putting his actual survival on the line.
And that's the core principle right there. You don't get to just cleanly drop your old life before the new life is actually strong enough to hold you up. Growth demands that uncomfortable, messy overlap, period.
We all fall for that, though, don't we? What you called the ruinous fantasy of perfect sequencing.
Oh, it's so tempting.
What exactly is that?
It's that little voice in your head that says, I'm just too busy right now. First, I'll clear my schedule, then I'll save up 6 months of salary, and then I'll finally start.
And that perfect moment just never, ever comes.
Never. Life just fills in the gaps you create. The real growth, the real building, it happens before it's clean. It happens in the mess. Knight just accepted the messiness. He used the known world to finance his exploration of the unknown world.
And his success, it wasn't some feeling of, I've made it. It was measured by a number, a hard number that proved the effort was real.
Exactly. This wasn't a movie montage moment. It was just the numbers started talking back. After years of this double life, by 1969, Blue Ribbon Sports hits $1 million in sales.
$1 million. That is a staggering number, especially when you think about the constraints he was under.
It completely changes the math.
Yeah, it shifts the entire psychological calculus, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The question is no longer, is this idea even viable?
No, that question is answered.
It becomes a new much scarier question, which is, okay, this is real, but am I willing to live like this forever? Because running both tracks indefinitely, that's just a straight path to burnout.
And that's why that $1 million mark wasn't just a revenue metric, it was structural proof.
Structural proof. I like that.
It proved that the resources, the momentum, the math of the shoe company, it finally outweighed the comfort and the security of the teaching job. That number was his exit trigger.
Ah, the exit trigger.
Yeah.
It's the thing that gives you permission to make the leap.
It justifies the terrifying but now calculated risk of dropping the stable job to go all in on the new one.
So for anyone listening who's feeling that overload right now, the tactic here isn't just work harder. It's to be really intentional about those two tracks.
That's right. First, you have to define your floor. What are the absolute non-negotiables that keep you and your family safe? Rent, food, basic savings.
Okay, your foundation.
Then you define your ceiling, the one and only one project that expands your future. You have to protect that floor, but all your extra energy, your discretionary effort goes only to the ceiling.
And I think a lot of people get stuck here. They feel like they need these huge 8-hour blocks of free time to work on their ceiling.
Which is impossible. The sources really emphasize consistency over intensity.
Right.
The advice is to time box that second track. Pick, say, 4 to 8 fixed hours a week. These are sacred. They are non-negotiable slots for your ceiling project.
That's like a contract with yourself.
It is. And you accept that for a season, everything else, chores, errands, maybe even some social stuff, might just have to be good enough. As long as you hit those fixed ceiling hours, that consistency week after week after week, that's what builds momentum out of nothing.
And having that exit trigger, that's the antidote to making a decision based purely on emotion.
Yes. It stops you from quitting your main job out of a moment of frustration, and it stops you from staying in it forever out of fear.
It has to be something you can measure.
Precisely. If your trigger is, say, getting 10 paying clients, or saving 6 months of operating cash, or getting a specific credential, then the decision to switch tracks becomes mathematical, not just emotional.
Okay, but we have to talk about the counterpoint here. This whole parallel track thing can fail, right? If the growth track is just endless planning.
Oh, absolutely. If your track B is just research and making spreadsheets and scheduling meetings, it's not growth, it's avoidance. You have to be producing something concrete in those 4 to 8 hours. A pitch, a page of code, a prototype, something real.
And the second big warning we saw, don't confuse being exhausted with being dedicated. You're protecting a floor for a reason.
Yes. If your actual foundation, your sleep, your key relationships, your mental health, if that starts to collapse, you're not building, you're just eroding the very stability that allows you to take any risks in the first place.
And sometimes that growth track has to shrink down to almost nothing just to keep it alive.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to a much more intense level of constraint. Phil Knight's problem was bandwidth, sure, but he had a stable home. What happens when the floor is completely gone? When the constraint isn't bandwidth, it's pure survival.
This is where we have to shift from parallel tracking to something more brutal, immediate triage.
And we turn to the story of Chris Gardner.
San Francisco, 1981. This is just a profound story of commitment under the absolute worst pressure. Gardner decides he wants to be a stockbroker.
A high finance job that pretty much requires a college degree, industry connections.
He had none of that.
None of it. He's cold calling, applying to Dean Witter, and he's driven by this motivation that was it was completely invisible to the guys in suits who were interviewing him.
Because at night, he wasn't just going home tired from a long day, he was homeless.
He was homeless with his young son, fighting this daily battle for survival, moving between shelters, just trying to find a safe place to sleep every single night. The constraint here isn't just financial, it's existential.
And he had to show up at that brokerage office every morning, put on the suit, and act and look and sound like someone who had security, who had margin, who had a stable address to go home to.
The psychological dissonance there it's almost impossible to imagine. The sheer amount of willpower it takes to hold that professional composure together when your private life is a minute-to-minute battle for basic needs.
And his strategy, it wasn't built on some grand plan. It was built on what the sources called a private arithmetic of absolute necessity.
He was logging 15-hour days. But why? It's because the shelters had curfews. He had to be back by a certain time, which meant his entire working day had to be compressed and absolutely maximally productive.
The numbers are incredible. He was making over 200 phone calls a day. That's not just ambition.
No, that's not ambition. That is a visceral, absolute refusal to fail. That's what happens when the floor is truly gone and the work is the only possible path back to safety.
And this is where he basically codified this principle of triage as survival.
Right. When you're operating under that kind of extreme constraint, and look, this can apply to housing insecurity like Gardner, or a season where you're juggling, say, a sick parent, a new baby, and a demanding job, you feel like you're failing at everything at once.
The instinct is to feel like a total global failure.
And so the lesson isn't to try and do it all, which is what exhausted people try to do. The lesson is to choose the order of operations and then defend that order ruthlessly.
So what does that ruthless triage actually look like practically?
It looks like organizing the chaos into 3 buckets. First bucket, non-negotiables. For Gardner, that was his son's care and showing up for that job opportunity. That's it. 2 things he could not drop no matter how tired he was.
Okay, bucket 2.
Negotiables. This is everything else that can be temporarily downgraded to good enough. Your house is a mess. Fine. Your meals are simple. Fine. Your replies to emails are slow. That's fine. You accept good enough as a temporary state.
And the third bucket is just gone for now.
Luxuries. Everything you will return to later. Hobbies, perfect workout routine, social life, organizing the garage. In a survival-level constraint, those things just cease to exist for a little while. And the goal of this whole process is not to have a beautiful, balanced life. The goal is just continuity.
Just keep moving.
Just keep moving forward long enough for the situation to structurally change.
Okay, I have to push back a bit here, because telling people to work 15 hours a day and adopt a crisis model, they can easily slide into toxic hustle culture. How do we make sure triage is a temporary bridge, not a permanent lifestyle?
That is a critical distinction. Gardner's 15-hour days were driven by a terminal necessity. For most of us, triage is a tool for when we feel paralyzed by too many demands. It means shrinking the battlefield.
So if you're overwhelmed, you just pick one winning metric for the week.
Exactly. One thing. This week, I will send 10 applications, or I will make 20 calls. And you consciously let everything else just coast in maintenance mode, knowing it's temporary. It's a state of maximum compression for a short period.
So the takeaway is about shrinking the focus, but also about using the tiny gaps of time.
Right. Exploit the micro windows. Gardner didn't have big blocks of free time. He had 10, maybe 20 minutes between things. So if you're in line at the store, you're reviewing notes on your phone. If you're walking to the car, you're dictating a voice memo. You use those micro windows to fight back against the feeling of being paralyzed by the size of the whole project.
And the last piece, which seems crucial, is asking for structural help. You can't just willpower your way through a triage season.
You can't. You have to design a system to reduce the load. A childcare swap with a neighbor, asking for an extension on a deadline, renegotiating chores at home, whatever it is.
But again, the ethical constraint. Triage is a bridge. It's not a place to live.
Absolutely not. If the crisis is genuinely severe, actual food insecurity, housing instability, severe mental health strain, the only ethical and practical move is to seek stabilization first. You can't build a business if you can't feed your family. Gardner eventually succeeded, founded his own firm, Gardner Rich & Company, in 1987. It proved that the unsustainable season can eventually buy the sustainable future.
It's amazing how these constraints force you to be so surgical with your time. But being surgical doesn't help when the bank account is at zero. What happens when the survival problem isn't time, it's that you have no capital?
Then you have to move past triage and into something else, extreme resourcefulness.
And for that, we have to talk about the early days of Airbnb and Brian Chesky.
San Francisco, 2008, the team is trying to build their company, but they are just sinking financially. Chesky and his co-founder, Joe Gebbia, were reportedly carrying something like $20,000 each in credit card debt.
Wow.
And the core product, renting out air mattresses on the floor, was just completely failing to get any traction. Their runway wasn't short, it was gone.
So they're overloaded with debt, with worry, with the feeling of professional failure.
And this is where they make what we have to call the ugly move. The maneuver that looks totally ridiculous and unscalable from the outside. They were just desperate for cash. Any cash.
And that ugly move was cereal.
Limited edition cereal boxes, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the 2008 presidential election, so they came up with Obama-O's and Captain McCain's. This wasn't some brilliant marketing plan. This was a last-ditch creative gasp for air.
Just think about that for a second. You're trying to pitch yourself as the next big thing in tech, a platform that's going to change travel forever. And you're spending your nights hand-assembling cardboard cereal boxes.
They printed them, they folded them, they filled them, about 1,000 boxes, and sold them for $40 each. The mental whiplash of going from tech founder to novelty breakfast salesman must have been intense.
But it's the definition of doing whatever it takes. And it actually worked, at least in the short term.
It did. The stunt got them some press and brought in somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000, and that revenue was lifeblood.
And that money was more than their actual room rental service had made up to that point.
Right, so the cereal was pure oxygen. It bought them maybe another month or two of runway. It didn't solve the core business problem, but it kept them alive.
And that defines the next principle. Resourcefulness beats balance.
Yes. When you're drowning in pressure, cash pressure, career pressure, the shame of it all, your biggest asset isn't a perfect schedule. It's the ability to keep the dream alive by doing whatever it takes, even if it looks absurd.
Most people in that situation would either try to optimize their way out of it or just give up. They did the third messy thing. They embraced the hustle.
They accepted that survival was going to look undignified. And that hustle, that's what became the pivot point for them. When they finally applied to the startup incubator Y Combinator, the founder, Paul Graham, he wasn't that impressed with their metrics.
Wait, really? The fact that they were selling sugary cereal was what convinced him.
It was proof of determination. It showed that they were resilient. Graham apparently said he saw them as cockroaches, meaning they just wouldn't die. That act of short-term, unscalable absurdity is what led directly to the seed funding they needed.
So the cereal was the hinge. It was proof of grit.
Exactly. So for the listener, the tactics here are about getting brutally honest. If you're in a cash crunch season, you need absolute clarity.
First step, the 14-day runway sheet.
Yes. Track cash in, cash out. Literally calculate how many days of runway you have left. That clarity forces you out of denial and into action.
And second, you have to do one unscalable act every single day.
This is the counterintuitive part. Everyone's obsessed with scale, but you can't scale something that doesn't work yet. So you do one thing that takes too long. A manual fix, a personal follow-up call to one customer, a handwritten note. The cereal boxes were the ultimate unscalable act, but they generated cash and, more importantly, taught the founder something about marketing.
And then you turn that chaos into a story. The messy workaround, the desperate hustle, that becomes the proof of your resilience in your next job interview or funding pitch.
You're proving you can survive the worst-case scenario. The constraint, though, is huge. This has to be temporary and ethical. It can't become a permanent state of emergency where you burn out your health and relationships. And you can't confuse a clever hustle like the cereal with actually building a product people want. Resourcefulness only buys you time.
It buys time. And that's the one thing we're all starved for when we're running two tracks.
Yeah.
But when you buy that time, you have to use it. You have to stop waiting for a whole day to open up, and you have to start building in the little gaps.
Which brings us to Stephen King and the principle of crack building.
Right. We all have this romantic image of the successful author, but King's early reality was just mundane, soul-crushing overload.
This is Hampton, Maine, early 1970s. He's a high school English teacher. So he's grading stacks of papers, he's commuting, he's dealing with a young family, tight finances, and just profound daily fatigue.
He wasn't writing in some beautiful, quiet cabin. He was writing in the leftovers. Evenings, weekends, whatever little sliver of time was left after all his main obligations were met.
And that's the reality for most of us, isn't it? The overload isn't just the job. It's the groceries and the laundry and the logistics that never, ever pause for your big dream.
And you can see how fragile that dream was. The story is famous now, but he nearly gave up on the manuscript for Carrie after just a few pages.
He was tired, he doubted the idea, and the effort just felt way too big for the tiny pockets of time he had. He literally threw the first few pages in the trash.
And that is such a relatable moment. That feeling of self-doubt when you look at a huge project and you only have 30 minutes. The voice that says, this is impossible with the resources I have.
And what saves it isn't some sudden burst of inspiration from him, it's external support. His wife, Tabitha, she finds the pages in the garbage can, reads them, and tells him she sees something in it and that he should keep going.
So sometimes someone else has to loan you their belief in your project.
Especially when your life is that crowded, and he kept going. Not because his schedule got any easier, but because he committed to producing pages, one sitting at a time, in the cracks of his day.
Which defines the concept perfectly.
Crack building. It's the disciplined practice of doing meaningful work in those small, imperfect spaces between your other obligations. It forces you to stop that destructive habit of treating small amounts of time as worthless.
Yeah, that's the killer, isn't it? I only have 30 minutes, so why even start? I'll just wait for Saturday.
And Saturday never comes, or when it does, you're too tired. King just accepted the terms. Teach all day, grade papers, be a husband and father, and write anyway. He traded perfection for production.
So tactically, how do you make those small cracks actually count?
Two really powerful tactics here. First is the 45-minute rule. If you have a 45-minute gap, you treat it like a real focused work session. Phone off, door closed, single tasking. That is your sacred writing time or coding time or whatever it is.
And second tactic gets around the biggest problem with small blocks, which is just getting started again.
Exactly. You leave a breadcrumb. You always end your session mid-sentence or you write down the very next specific action. That way, future, doesn't waste the first 10 minutes trying to remember where you were. You just sit down, read the last half-finished thought, and you're instantly back in it.
That little bit of reduced friction makes all the difference when you're already running on empty.
It compounds every single day. And look at the result. Carrie gets accepted in 1973. The paperback advance in 1974 was $400,000.
Right.
That money didn't just reward the effort, it fundamentally reordered their entire life. It turned writing at night in the cracks into writing as a full-time career. It's the ultimate proof that crack building is how you stay in the game long enough for that financial hinge to arrive.
But let's go back to the constraint. You said this isn't about being always on. How do you stop this from just becoming another form of burnout?
You have to protect one weekly deep block. Crack building is great for momentum, but you also need depth. So you need one protected 2 or 3 hour block every week to synthesize, plan, and really work on the harder parts of the project. And if you are chronically burnt out or sleep deprived, stabilization is your first job, not building.
Right. You can't use "I'm building" as an excuse to neglect your health or your family.
Never.
Okay, so we've gone from surviving a crisis to finding the time. Now, how do you go from just managing the chaos to actually weaponizing it?
Yeah.
Intentionally stacking your goals so they support each other.
For that, there is no better example than Arnold Schwarzenegger and what we call productive stacking.
Los Angeles, 1968. He arrives at 21, barely speaks English, but has this just massive, multi-layered ambition.
He wasn't chasing one dream. It was a 3-part stack all at the same time. Be the world's greatest bodybuilder, make serious money, and become a movie star. Most people would try to do those one after another. Arnold attacked them all at once.
And he didn't wait for one to take off before starting the next. He's training like a maniac at Gold's Gym. That's his primary craft. But at the same time, he knows he needs business skills and communication skills for the long game.
So he's taking English as a second language classes at Santa Monica College in the early 70s, tackling that language barrier. But the critical piece was the money. He refused to be a starving artist or a starving bodybuilder.
Right, so he started a bricklaying and construction business with his friend Franco Colombo.
He stacked income, health, education, and craft all at the same time. And it wasn't just the construction. The sources show he became a self-made millionaire from real estate investing well before he was a huge movie star. He used his fame from bodybuilding to fuel his business deals.
And he got a business degree on top of all that.
An undergraduate business degree from the University of Wisconsin-Superior. So in one decade, he's a world-class athlete, a construction business owner, a real estate investor, and a full-time student.
The insight there is that he didn't demand that any single one of those lanes got 100% of his attention every day. He just demanded that each important lane got a turn, consistently.
It completely flips the script on how we normally think about our lives. Productive stacking says you don't need less to do, you just need to organize the important things better. The strain you feel isn't proof you're failing, it's proof you're attempting something big.
So how do we apply this? How do you stack things without just becoming totally scattered and disorganized?
You use the 3-lane week. You have to limit your focus to 3 major lanes, max. For most people, this is something like income, health, and craft. And you schedule one protected block for each of those lanes every single week. You're building guardrails around your ambition.
And I think the most freeing idea here is using minimums, not maxims.
Oh, absolutely. Maxims like, I must write for 2 hours today. They're fragile. They're easily broken by a sick kid or a crisis at work. Minimums are resilient.
Like, I will write 1 paragraph, or I will do 1 sales outreach call.
Exactly. Define the smallest possible dose that keeps each lane alive. If all you can manage is a 20-minute workout,
That is a win. That minimum dose keeps the day from feeling like a total collapse.
And you have to reframe it mentally. You have to say it out loud. This is a stacking season. That stops the shame, the feeling that you're always scattered, which is what leads to burnout.
The crucial counterpoint, though, is that stacking requires recovery. Arnold was famous for his sleep and focus. You have to protect sleep as a non-negotiable. And if you keep adding more and more lanes, you're not stacking anymore. You're just scattering. You're doing a lot, but making zero real progress. Limit it to 3 lanes.
So stacking is the goals you're juggling, but then there's the where, making your environment actually support that load. This is structure substitution.
We always try to carry the whole load with our own willpower, but Daymond John shows us the real trick is to redesign your environment to carry the load for you.
Queens, New York, 1989. Daymond John is working shifts at Red Lobster.
While trying to build his apparel company, FUBU, so he's balancing being a good employee with being a founder, juggling money stress, inventory, all of it.
And as FUBU started getting some traction, he hits that classic problem. His ambition outgrew his capital. He needed funding to scale up.
So he went to the banks, and the traditional system just completely failed him. He was famously turned down by 27 different banks.
27.
That kind of friction, that constant no, that's what kills most side projects. It's the world telling you your dream is too big for your current resources.
And the big moment, the hinge. It comes from his mother.
Yeah.
She provides the structural support.
She mortgaged her own home in Hollis, Queens to raise $100,000. And then she literally turned half their house into a makeshift factory. Sewing machines, materials, production. It was all happening right there.
Just think about that. The place that's supposed to be your sanctuary, your escape from work.
Yeah.
It becomes the factory floor. That is structure substitution.
You're replacing missing time, missing capital, missing infrastructure with a smarter space and smarter support. It removed the commute. It allowed for constant iteration. It turned family support into pure operational capacity. He stopped trying to solve the problem by working harder and started solving it by designing better.
That's the mindset shift. The task isn't do more, it's design a cart. Stop trying to carry everything on your back.
So for the listener, the tactics are all about removing friction from your environment. First, create a dedicated progress station, one corner of one room. A specific desk, a specific chair, something that removes the 10 minutes of setup time it takes to get started.
Because if it takes 10 minutes to unpack your project, you'll never use those 30-minute cracks we talked about earlier.
Never. Second, batch your life admin. All your errands, bills, logistics, put them into one block per week so they stop bleeding into every single day and breaking your focus.
And finally, focus on outputs.
A weekly throughput goal. Not work hard, but produce 5 of these or make 10 of these calls. When Daymond John had a factory in his house, he measured shirts produced. You need to measure your own outputs.
But the constraint here is huge. Mortgaging a house is a massive risk not everyone can or should take.
Absolutely. The structure has to match reality and safety. And you have to be careful not to turn your home into a permanent pressure cooker. If you borrow resources, money, space, favors, you need crystal clear agreements on how they'll be paid back.
Okay, so we've covered running 2 tracks, surviving crisis, hustling for cash, building in the cracks, stacking goals, and redesigning our environment. We land on the final and maybe the hardest concept, overcoming the shame of being in between, and why we all need to respect the bridge job.
We look at people like Harrison Ford or James Dyson and we just see the end result. Han Solo, the Dyson vacuum. We completely skip over the long, hard, unglamorous middle where by any normal metric they were stalled.
Harrison Ford's early story is perfect for this. He had an early movie contract, made $150 a week, but an executive bluntly told him he had no future in the business.
I mean, that's not just a critique, that's a verdict on your whole identity.
And he didn't quit acting. He made a trade. He became a carpenter in the 60s and 70s to support his family. And the key is, he refused to see that as a failure or something to be ashamed of. He saw it as a functional, necessary strategy.
And that's the principle. The bridge job is a strategy. It's not a detour. It is a temporary support beam that buys you mental oxygen and time until your main craft can support you. It protected his family, his artistic integrity, and it bought him patience.
And that stability is what led to the big break, unexpectedly.
Because he was a good carpenter, he started getting jobs for people in the industry, like Francis Ford Coppola. That proximity, that network he'd built through his bridge job is what literally got him in the audition room for Star Wars. The thing that looked like a step back was actually the platform for his dream.
And you see that same need for patience, just magnified by 1,000 with James Dyson.
15 years. 5,127 prototypes to perfect his vacuum cleaner.
That is staggering.
And think about the load on his family during that time. The sources say that by prototype number 2000-something, he and his wife were really counting our pennies. By prototype 3000, she was giving art lessons to bring in extra cash just to keep the project afloat. That is relentless iteration under extreme load.
He wasn't trying to find balance for those 15 years. He was just trying to solve the next problem, build the next prototype, and survive the next financial crunch.
The default habit we're fighting here is interpreting the need for a normal job as proof that we're losing. That shame is what makes people quit right before they get good enough. You can't let your ego mistake a necessity for a failure.
So the tactics for anyone right now who's on their own bridge job, they have to be about sustainability and self-respect.
First, define 2 wins per week. 1 stability win, hitting your income goal, getting your admin done, and 1 growth win, practicing your skill, doing some outreach. This acknowledges the work of the bridge while still feeding the dream.
And you have to reframe it out loud. Just say it. This is my bridge job.
That labeling makes it strategic and temporary. It removes the shame. And you use that bridge job to build credibility. Show up on time, be reliable. Those skills will compound later.
The constraint, though, is that the bridge job cannot consume all of your energy, and you can't stay on it forever if it's not actually leading anywhere.
Right. If the bridge becomes permanent, you need clarity. Maybe you need different training or a different path, but you figure that out without shame.
So we've pulled these 6 blueprints, these actionable principles for how to operate when you're under maximum constraint.
We started with Phil Knight and running 2 tracks, that parallel track growth, protecting your floor while you raise your ceiling. Then Chris Gardner showed us how to use triage as a survival tool to just maintain continuity.
We saw Brian Chesky use extreme resourcefulness, the cereal boxes, to buy oxygen when cash was gone. And Stephen King taught us to stop waiting for the perfect time and start crack building in those little 45-minute pockets we actually have.
Arnold Schwarzenegger taught us about productive stacking, making sure our 3 core lanes get a turn consistently. And Damon John showed us how to use structure substitution to redesign our environment to carry the load for us.
And finally, Harrison Ford proved that we have to respect the bridge job as a deliberate strategy that buys us the patience to keep going.
So if you're feeling that strain of handling too much right now, we want you to just choose 3 tiny steps right now.
First, define your floor and your ceiling. 2 sentences. My floor is protected by X. My ceiling grows when I do Y. Just that clarity is power.
Second, identify your 2 non-negotiables for the next 7 days. Only 2. That shrinks the battlefield and saves your energy.
And third, schedule 2 non-negotiable 45-minute crack sessions this week for that ceiling goal. And leave yourself a breadcrumb at the end of each one.
Don't wait for inspiration. Just show up for the process.
The final message from all of this, the thing that ties it all together, is pretty simple. You do not wait for your life to clear up to start building your future. The successful path requires operating in the strain, not avoiding it. The question isn't, can I find balance? It's, how well can I execute inside the chaos?
Run 2 tracks on purpose until 1 track can carry you.